Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very honored to be hosting two absolutely brilliant authors, Brit Bennett and Ayelet Waldman, and to have the opportunity to hear their thoughts on writing, parenting, and, well, life defined by our shared and differentiated histories. This is an event in collaboration with our partners and members, 826LA, who are based in our Hollywood location. For those of you who are new to Second Home, we're a creative and community-focused workspace, as well as a cultural venue with locations in London, Lisbon, and Los Angeles. I will now pass over to Joe to say a few words about the event and about 826LA. I just wanted to say they really are a fantastic organization that is helping young students develop their creative writing skills. And so do consider supporting them as well. You can do so at 826la.org/donate. And thanks again for joining. Over to you, Joel.
Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Second Home, for setting up the conversation. My name is Joel Arquios, and I'm the Executive Director of 826LA. For those of you who are unfamiliar with 826LA, we're a writing and tutoring organization. We have locations in the Mar Vista and Echo Park neighborhoods of Los Angeles. We also have sites on two campuses in high schools, one in East LA and one in South LA. For the past year, we've been supporting our students online and have learned a lot of new ways of delivering our services. But it's been a wonderful experience as well, even with all the challenges. Our mission is to help students who attend Title I schools in LA with their creative and expository writing skills. We believe that every student deserves to write their own future. As a writing organization, we are especially honored to co-host this event with two accomplished authors. Brit Bennett is the author of The Vanishing Half, which debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and The Mothers. Ayelet Waldman is a New York Times bestselling author as well. Her most recent books are A Really Good Day and Love and Treasure. Both Brit and Ayelet have written about the different ways that families are impacted by history and identity. At 826LA, we witness daily how systemic racism, poverty, and now the pandemic affect our students and their families. And while the solutions to such enormous issues are multifaceted, we believe that the ability to describe one's experiences and imagine a new chapter is vital. If you are here today, I expect that you too believe in the power of words. I hope you'll seek out more information about 826LA on our website, 826la.org, and consider donating or volunteering and getting involved with us. And now, without further ado, I'll turn things over to Ayelet and Brit.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. We're from opposite sides of the country right now. You're in Brooklyn. Have you been in Brooklyn this whole time?
I have. Yeah, I've been here since 2019. So I was, for the most part, I've been here.
How's it been so far? I mean, we know how it's been in New York, but how have you been able to work? I guess what I mean, like, have you been able to work?
I have been able to, I think just because the alternative was so bleak. I spent most of the quarantine just by myself. So if I wasn't writing, I think I truly would have completely unraveled. So I have been able to work. It's been a little bit, I think this period of the quarantine has been the hardest for me, productivity wise. I think last March and April, I was able to kind of put my head down and work. And here at this point where you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, that's where I think it's been the hardest to focus.
That's for sure been the case for me too. Like at the beginning of, I have had a challenge working the whole time, but I think at the beginning I got super focused on, founding this nonprofit to support restaurants in Oakland and Berkeley, and that took a lot of my time. And then I had a bunch of scripts to write, so those are very, contained. But I thought to myself, okay, this is gonna last for a long time. I'm just gonna get this novel done. It's been hanging over my head for years. Nothing, not a word. It's really striking it.
I would think I was lucky because I had a project that I had started. I think if I had to start something during the quarantine, I absolutely would not have been able to do it. So I had the project that I was a couple years into it. And otherwise, I think no, there's no way I would have been able to start something new right now.
Yeah, it's so strange. And like I think everybody is agreeing with that. What was that article in the New York Times recently? I'm sorry, my like completely spacing about the word that they languishing. I was like,
Right.
yes, this period is such period of languishing.
Yeah,
I
I think
just
there
want
was a thing in I think there's a thing in the Atlantic that kind of compared it to senioritis, which is a
yeah.
weird like other way of thinking about it, but it feels like yeah, spring semester of your senior year where you're just like ready to break free.
And I know it's so completely crazy to me because I've been able to work. I went back to work when my kids were a couple months old. I was just like in between breastfeeding. I would go out to a cafe. I would get my 1,000 words. I'd come home. There was never, getting my work done was just not ever an issue. I would tell people I don't believe in procrastination. I don't believe in writer's block. It's just a matter of sitting your ass down in the chair. And now for a year, I've been like,
Yeah, I can definitely relate to some of that.
I wanted to ask you, I know that HBO has The Vanishing Half. Are you writing the scripts for that or?
No, I'm not. I did not want to do that. I'm not a fan of adapting my own work. So I didn't want to do that. But I'm an executive producer. I'm involved weighing in on what the writers are up to. So it's been it's been like the ideal level of involvement of being on the call and giving notes and all of that, but not
Who's
having
writing
to
it?
actually be Aziza Barnes and Jeremy O'Harris are co-writing it.
Cool.
So yeah, it's been nice.
Michael and I have been adapting Cavalier and Clay. That's like the one thing I actually accomplished this last 6 months of quarantine is we got about 5 scripts done for
Wow.
Cavalier and Clay. Yeah, wow. It's been somehow, because they begin and they end, it's been easier for me to think about doing that than thinking about this novel.
Well, do you find it, I mean, I guess do you find it easier or harder to adapt with somebody? Like, do you find that helpful to work with somebody on it? And 2, is it different adapting? Like, I talk to writers sometimes who don't like, I was talking to someone who did not like adapting her own work, but loved adapting other people's books. So I wonder if that's also an experience.
I've done both. I definitely feel freer when I'm adapting my own work just to ignore everything and just be like, well, this sucks and throw it aside. But I love adapting Michael's, and Michael and I have a very specific way that we work, which maybe isn't the way everybody works, but like we outline together, and actually nowadays we sort of brainstorm together. I write the first draft of the outline. He sort of makes it beautiful. And then we do the same thing with the scripts. I'll write the first draft, send it to him, and then we go, and then I'll write, like, he'll do the second, which is a big rewrite, and then I'll do the third. I always say, like, Michael makes it spectacular, and then I like roll back the spectacular a little bit. But I love adapting him because he writes in scenes. So a writer who writes in scenes with dialogue is much easier to adapt because you can kind of lift the scenes and lift the dialogue. Writers who write kind of more summary or a lot of interiority, it's a lot more challenging. Like the biggest challenge I think with screenwriting is trying to figure out, like, the beauty I think of fiction is it's the only medium where you actually can live in the mind of somewhere else, where you sort of experience what they're thinking. And it's all visual in screenwriting. So you have to figure out how do you make the audience understand what someone's thinking when a novel has lived so clearly in someone's mind.
Right.
So that's a challenge.
Yeah, that's what I found impossible about it.
Exactly. It's really hard. Like a lot of it, it's great if you have an actress already attached, because then you can be like, nah, she can do this. I'll just make one of those faces, Allison. You know those. Yeah. So did you get a chance to get out of Brooklyn at all?
I did. I was in California. I was in LA for most of this winter. I couldn't do the pandemic winter by myself, so I had to. I went to stay with my family for winter, so it was nice to get out and to, of course, be someplace warm, but also just to be around family and that. So So yeah, that was my sort of brief journey away. But it's good to be back. I think it's kind of hard to reconcile, I think, all of the experiences of this past year, and like returning to the place where I was quarantining alone has been like weirdly, I don't know, like there's like emotion attached to that I didn't expect. But it does feel so different now, just the feeling in the city feels completely different than the sheer like apocalyptic terror of a year ago.
Right. I know, it's so strange when I think of how that felt. I mean, I'm wondering, like, I think I am not going to be at all interested in the first round of fiction written about this, because it's going to be way too close and way too new. And I know I'm guilty of this. Like, I try always to write my way out of a emotion, or write my way out of a problem or an experience. And a lot of times the first things, like I lost a baby once, and the first thing I did was write a ghost story about a woman haunted through her baby monitor by the ghost of her dead baby. And that was, I really liked it, but like, I was creepy as hell. Like, really creepy. Like, that was for me. That was,
Yeah.
And then by the time I like worked my way to write the book that I actually think really was like a successful, I used that experience in a way that it was actually successful literarily, from a literary perspective, and not just from an emotional one. It took a while, like, right? It has to sit in your head for a while. So I think like maybe phase 2 pandemic books, I think will be, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if that I'll ever be interested in reading them, to be honest, like for myself. But it also, like, I think about the idea of writing anything, even if you're like not trying to write a pandemic book, you're writing anything that spans, 2020, 2021, like how else, like what else would be, it's like ignoring like World War I or something. Like you kind of have to, but I agree. I mean, I think, I don't know. It's hard for me to. I think it's also hard for me to draw meaning from anything, like when you're still in the moment. Like we're still to sort of produce meaning of what this meant, if it meant anything. That's something that I find really difficult. But a lot of my friends who are teaching at universities are already starting to get pandemic short stories from their students, which I think has been difficult for them to kind of have to parse through, of just, I think, emotionally, even as we're still in this moment.
I always say that, like, all my friends who've taught, you can always tell there's every year there's a rash of like exquisitely crafted first short story collections about growing up, about spending a year as a young person in a place that's really cold, a really small Iowa town. And I feel like at least now, maybe that class of writing program graduates will not be writing exquisitely crafted short stories about, bleak Iowa winters. They'll be writing exquisitely crafted short stories about being in their apartments.
Yeah.
Going to remote bleak Iowa winter school.
Right. I mean, I think also the thing that will, I guess, potentially be interesting about it is because it feels like we all experienced such different pandemics. Like there are people whose families were decimated. There are people who like moved to a second house and were fine. Like there are so many different sort of dramatically different experiences. Some people who just never stopped like doing what they were doing and continued to, like people who weren't, quarantining really, or people who couldn't quarantine. I think that I guess that to me is what might be narratively interesting. Although I'm sure we're going to get the same kind of 20 somethings in Brooklyn, whatever that we're going to get from it. But I do think that kind of wide range of what everybody's experienced will be interesting narratively. Although I don't know that I will have the stomach to kind of revisit it. I'm very ready to move on from this period of my life.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I wonder, but it is funny, like, is everyone just going to skip it? Like, will this contemporary stories just start in like 2022 or everyone will be writing about 2018 and they're just going to be like a hole in the, in the Library of Congress, like right around this period.
Yeah, I'm ready for
have
that.
you been able to read? Like, have you been able to read with the same kind of focus as before?
I would say not the same type of focus. I do think that audiobooks have helped a bit.
Totally.
My pandemic hobby has been walking around and listening to podcasts or audiobooks. So that's been helpful, I think. So not the same level of focus, but I think for me, the moment I felt kind of like my brain returned like last March, April was when I first like started to read again. And I had like a really long stretch of just like, I'm not a fast reader by nature, but I had a very long stretch of just like tearing through books. And then my book came out and that just kind of ground everything to a halt. But that was kind of the moment where I finally felt like my attention span had returned when I wasn't just doom scrolling all day, that last March,
Right.
April. So yeah, not in the way that I wanted to or used to, but I think the audiobooks have helped to supplement it and also to like make me feel purpose when I'm going like on my sort of aimless walks just to get fresh air. It feels like I'm accomplishing something even if I'm not going anywhere. It just gives you that feeling, I think, when you get to listen to a good story.
That's the same thing that happened to me too. I've actually had a really hard time. I've never experienced this before in my life where I wasn't, I mean, I always have a book. I mean, reading fiction is like we said before, like it's my only hobby. So, but I had a really hard time making meaning out of the fiction I was reading until I started, like I don't do crafts. I'm like the least crafty person on earth, but I took up embroidery. I don't know why. I cannot explain why. First, I embroidered a bunch of samplers that said "fuck Trump," and then I moved on from that. And I would listen to audiobooks, and I just went back, like I just rolled it back. So first, I was listening with my husband, and we listened to Middlemarch, and I'm like, okay, now I know what this is, and now this I can bring all of the focus to bear. And then we like listened to all the Jane Austen, and we listened to we just sort of, you know, we're listening to things like that we hadn't read in a really long time, and then kind of got a little more contemporary and actually listened to some nonfiction, which is not something I don't usually read any nonfiction, so this was sort of good. But like that's what it took for me. It's like, you know, spending 36 hours listening to an audiobook while I embroider was actually pretty, that's kind of that's sort of what got me over this weird inability to focus.
Yes. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
What else do we talk about? What do you want to do you talk about what you're working on now, or is that a secret?
It's not a secret. I'm working on a third novel. It's a book about music. So that has required a lot of reading books about music of varying levels of quality, but that has been fun nonetheless. And a lot of playlists and sort of diving into musical podcasts about music. I've gotten to a lot of those. Which feels like kind of a very organic form to learn about music, because you can hear, you know, they can play the clips of the song as they're talking about it, which is something I just really enjoy. So yeah, that's been it's been a project I've been working on. I say that I'm at the beginning of it. I started it probably in 2018. So it's not new, but I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm at that part of the book. So it's still, but like I said, I was glad to have that to focus on I wrote a couple drafts in quarantine, and again, of varying levels of quality, because this is my sort of solo quarantine, you know, slowly unraveling alone in my apartment draft. So I cannot say that it's any good, but I think in particular, that book was so helpful to think about during the quarantine, to read a book about, you know, music and concerts and people being together at parties and that type of world, a very sort of vivid world that I think it's been really nice to have that to focus on, even though it's been really stumping me. I'm trying to figure it out. Yeah. What about you?
Well, like I was saying, I've been doing mostly television and ignoring this novel that I've had due for, I don't even want to think how many. I remember once hearing about a writer who was like 5 years late on a novel and being like, what the hell is your problem? Just sit down and get your work done. And now I'm like, I just hope nobody from Knopf is on this Zoom. But well, right now what I'm doing is Jackie Woodson, you know Jackie, don't you?
Yeah, we're
So
friends. Yeah.
yeah, so Jackie and I have a show at Netflix. So that's what I'm working on.
That's cool.
We're pretty stoked about that. We're doing that with Shonda Rhimes' company, Shonda
Awesome.
Land, and hopefully that will move forward pretty soon, and we'll be opening up.
Is it an adaptation or something completely different?
No, it's this. Well, ish. It's kind of a springboard from her novel Behind You, which is about a young kid who gets killed, but it's this kind of, it's amazing immersion into a kind of supernatural world based on African American folklore. So it's just like Jackie's imagination is this incredible wellspring of genius, and it's just
Awesome.
I'm just strapped on and I'm along for the ride. So
Cool.
really
I can't wait to see that.
And then like a whole bunch of other TV projects. I've just been really interested in screenwriting lately. So that's what I've been doing. I have like you know, some shows with other writers and some of my own things that I'm working on. So that's fun.
Yeah. Do you find that move from fiction to TV? Do you find it generative, difficult to kind of move between those modes?
I actually think it's really hard to move between the modes. I used to say, no, I'll do one thing, I'll do the other.
Yeah.
But when I was doing that, I would like write a book and then I would go back to some TV writing. I couldn't or I would write at least a big, a serious draft, not those kind of nibble drafts, but like a real draft. And now I think one of the reasons that I maybe am not paying much attention is to my book is because I'm sort of more interested in the TV stuff, because even if you're writing a whole series so that it's like almost like a novel, there's a really great thing that happens along the way where you finish something.
Right.
You begin it and then you're done with it. And it happens pretty quickly. It happens in like sometimes less than a month. And that's been really satisfying.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah. I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine.
I remember one of my novels took me, sometimes I write really quickly, but one of my novels took me years and years. And I don't remember it bothering me that much. It was just like, okay, that's what I'm doing. The only time it's sort of annoying is when people say to you like, wait, are you still working on that book?
Yeah, I think that's the similar thing that I feel sometimes writing nonfiction, of just being like, yeah, the essay starts and it ends and you're done and you can move on from it, versus, like I said, this book I've been working on since 2018 and I'm like, yeah, I just started it. That like moving away from that, I definitely envy that.
Totally. Can I ask, what made you move to Brooklyn?
I was teaching at the time. I was teaching at Columbia when I first got here, and I think part of that was the teaching. The other part was just kind of wanting something different. I grew up in California, and then went to grad school in Michigan. Moved back to California when I was done with grad school, and I was kind of ready for a change. So I really love the city. I hate that I moved here, as everything was about to, sort of the pandemic was about to begin. I hate that. But I had so much fun when I first got here, and I'm hoping that on the other side of this pandemic, I'll be able to enjoy the city.
I bet it'll be an amazing summer.
I think so. I think it's going to be a great summer.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. It'll be hot, but it'll be great. I lived in New York when I was right after law school and also right after college, and always assumed that I would live in New York. Being from California, sort of living in California just seemed an impossible thought. It wasn't something you did if you were from New York. It was like a million miles away. I'd never really, it was like I saw it on 8 is Enough or something. My familiarity with California, but now it's hard for me to imagine leaving here. And for a long time, I would set my books on the East Coast because it just felt more natural. It felt like that's who I was and what made sense for my, like, where I could get my brain. But now I actually feel like I go back to New York and I'm like, I don't know this city anymore. I don't know how I could write about this city. I feel like I'm much more likely to be able to set a book in Prague than I am, or Budapest than I am in New York now, because I know I have to do the research for a book set in Budapest, but I don't know. I would assume I would know things in New York, and then I would be like, wait a minute, that's not really true. That has been true since like 1998.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I definitely love LA and I love New York. My heart is sort of split between those cities, I think, in a lot of ways. But I have like increasingly begun to think of myself as a California writer. And I think mostly thought of myself as such when I was not in California. Like, I think when I was in Michigan, I realized like, yeah, I'm a California writer. That this is what I'm interested in, the kind of mythologies surrounding California and the migration to California that my family, my dad is originally from LA. My mom moved there from Louisiana. So that I think is one of the kind of migrations that happens in my book, because those are the sides of my family, and that kind of wave of Black migration into LA in particular is so interesting to me. So I've realized that I am, I think, a California writer in that way. But at the same time, like, yeah, I also love being in New York. I think it's kind of, I guess, a writer cliche to love both of those places, maybe.
But maybe it's the same thing as like we were talking about the pandemic, like needing distance from it to sort of figure out what it means and to write about it with any kind of perspective. It's like the same thing. You had to leave LA to write about LA in another way, in a different way.
I think so. And I think really, the first time I really began to write about my hometown, I'm from Oceanside, which is like North San Diego. And the first time I wrote about it was when I was in college, which was in the Bay Area. And I began, like, it was like that first moment of distance of not being at home and thinking like, oh yeah, it's kind of weird that I grew up in this beach town, and like, this isn't a thing that everybody grew up, having surf PE at their high school. That's not just like
wait, hold up. You guys, like, gym was surfing?
Yeah, that was an option. I never took it, but yeah, there was surf PE was a class. And you had to get there. It was before school started, so you had to get there like super early to do it. And I was always just like, why would anybody want to be here earlier? But yeah, that was a class, and that was just like a normal thing when I was in high school. And I didn't think of it as being like a strange thing until I got to college and would talk to people about the experience of growing up in this beach town, and everyone was just like, what? So that was the first moment I think I began to write about California, or realize that I was consciously writing about California, because I was writing about my very specific sort of part of California, which is Oceanside, which is not a part of California that most people know or really have written about. Although it is where American Vandal takes place.
Is it really?
The first season, yeah, I've been trying to tell people there's an Oceanside Renaissance happening. And they said it has to be more than two things to be a Renaissance. So I said, okay, my book, American Vandal, those are the only two things. But
well done, you. So you got that nailed down.
They didn't shoot it there.
You are responsible for the Oceanside Renaissance.
They didn't shoot it. It looked convincingly like Oceanside. We're talking to friends about it. Everybody's like, whoa, they captured it pretty accurately. I thought the vibe of it, but of course they shot it in LA somewhere. But it's not a place that people know of really, unless you're from San Diego. Like, you've never really heard of it. So but that was really,
why did your parents move to Oceanside? Like, is it like where your grandparents or great grandparents lived, or was it just like your parents who said, I know where we want to live, we live on the beach?
No, it wasn't even that. It was my dad got a job with the city, so it was like not an interesting reason, but yeah, it was for his job. So we moved there when I was like 5, and I grew up there. But it's a military town, and nobody in my family was in the military, so I stayed there my whole childhood until I was 18 and went off to college. And I was one of the only people I knew who was like stable, because everybody's kind of coming and going in these military towns. So I was used to having kind of friends rotate in and rotate out as people's parents were being deployed or sent other ways.
Funny. I grew up all over the place. I was born in Israel, and then my family's from Canada. They're from Montreal, so we went back to Montreal. And then eventually moved to a bunch of different places in the States, and settled ultimately in New Jersey when I was like in middle school. We got there. So that's basically where I grew up. And I'm trying to imagine, like, when I think about your Oceanside, it has such it has a kind of like magical gloss, which only to the reader and not to the person experiencing it, I'm sure. But like, I don't know what the magical gloss would be on Ridgewood, New Jersey. I did put the town in a book of mine. Like, I did situate like the parents of a character in that town, but not because of any residual fun. Sure.
I mean, I think the funny thing to me about Oceanside is that my parents don't live there anymore, so I really don't go back often. But I did go back a few years ago when I had an event at the library there. And I met some friends from high school, and everybody was telling me, you know, Oceanside has been gentrified since you wrote this book. And they were like, they have rock climbing walls now, they have, you know, microbreweries, they have avocado toast, like it has been gentrified. And my friends were like, yeah, the Oceanside that you wrote about in the book no longer exists. You captured like the Oceanside of our childhood that it like has been gone. And that was news to me. So I guess you never know, having that distance. I guess even when I was writing the book, I was writing towards the past of growing up there that was already being changed, even though I didn't know it. So I guess that is the strange thing, I guess, about writing about where you're from.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what writing is about, period, right? Like, it's all an exercise in nostalgia. Like, even
Exactly.
if it's, you know, it's limiting the depths of your nostalgia. Should we go to questions, Joel?
Yes. Hi. Wow. I'm so sad to interrupt your wonderful conversation, but we do have some questions I'd love to give to both of you. Here's one that we just got that is directed at Brit. Brit, this is from Eileen, both The Mothers and Vanishing Half dealt with very specific, unique characters grounded in a time and or place different from my world, and yet I identified so strongly with them. How do you go about finding the universal while still being so specific?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think one thing is that I'm usually not thinking about trying to make anything universal, because I think that as soon as you try to do that, you fail at it. You know, I remember taking a writing class and the professor asking who is, you know, who's your ideal audience, or who's the audience for your book? Who do you imagine to be the audience? And I remember having people in my class who, I love them, but of course it was the white guys in the class who were like, everyone, the audience is everyone. And I remember just like laughing about it with some of my friends, at the kind of idea of the audience for me is every person. Because obviously I would love for everyone to enjoy the book, come to the book, connect to the book. But the idea that I am creating something that is going to be universally appealing, or that I'm attempting to appeal to everyone in some way, was always to me very kind of, you know, ridiculous. So I think for me, I
saw this tweet once, Brett, that said, God give me the confidence of a mediocre white man. Might be applicable to that situation.
I mean, you know, we had a lot of the other sort of women in the class. We all had like a good laugh about that. But I just, you know, that idea that you could write something, and of course my audience is every person, is, you know, that's never a way that I've thought about my work. So I think for me, it's just not attempting to do that. I think that things do become specific, or they become universal when they are specific. And to me, it's always about being as detailed as I can be, and understanding that readers are smart. And also, like, I think readers are people, and as readers, I include myself in that category. We are wanting to connect to characters when we read. We're wanting to see ourselves in people, or to find connections from their experiences to our own. So that's not something that I have to force or try to create. You know, I don't think it's something that I have to set out intentionally to do. So I think for me, the big thing is just being as specific and detailed as possible, and understanding that readers will see common humanity in these characters, and connect to them across difference.
Wonderful, thank you. Courtney asks, Ayelet just mentioned get my 1,000 words. We'd love to know from Brit and Ayelet if they try to write with word count goals in mind. What works best for them?
I mean, when I'm working on fiction or I try to get 1,000 words, and sometimes I'll get a lot more. Sometimes a lot more. It depends where I am or what I'm doing, but 1,000 words is kind of the bare minimum when I'm working on a novel. Otherwise, I could just, you know, space out all day. And I have all sorts of different tricks to do that. Like I just started using this app that's called a Pomodoro, which means tomato in Italian. I don't know why it's called that. And it's a little timer, and it gives you like you focus for 25 minutes and take a 5 or 10 minute break. And that seems to be really good for me, because that's like I can get like a good chunk of a couple of hundred words in that time. So I do it like that. Unfortunately, you can't really do that when you're screenwriting. So when I'm screenwriting, I just do something like I'll give myself more of a page count, but I don't like that as much. Word count is really, it's really an effective method for me.
Yeah. No, I used to do that. I think I don't know. I have a point now where I try not to, I mean, maybe this is why it's taking me so long to do these things, but I try not to create that kind of external pressure on myself. I think for me, it's more just like, how do I want to feel about this when I have reached a certain point? And sometimes it's like today I was working on something that was like a really intense emotional moment. And I was like, okay, all I want to do today is figure out this moment. And I don't know how many words that's going to be. I don't know how much of it I'm going to keep. I don't know how much of it is going to be useful, but like, this is like the thing. And once I get to the end of that, I will be like happy. And for me also, it's more of time. It's like, okay, I'm going to work until 10. I try to do like a 7 to 10 with like a break for coffee and stuff. But I try to do that some more. And as long as I'm sitting down in the chair during that time, if I do 100 words, great. If I do 1,000 words, great. But I think for me, that's kind of my marker of just like putting in the time and hoping that something comes out of it, which often it doesn't. Often it is you're sitting there staring at the screen for 3 hours. But I think that to me is how I have to deal with it psychologically.
Got it. Thank you for answering that. I do a page count. That's how I go about it. Here's one, another one, Brit. I'm currently reading, this is from Maudlin. I'm currently reading The Vanishing Half, and it's so good. One thing I notice is the strength of each character's voice. It would be interesting to know how you craft the voice of each character, and how important would you say voice is, especially in The Vanishing Half?
Thank you. I think it's really important. And I think it really depends. There's sometimes, for some characters, like there are some characters who I intentionally wanted to write sections in their point of view. Like sometimes I would write something directly in a first person, even though it ultimately ended up being third person in the book, but I would just write it in first person just to hear their voice and get a sense of kind of what the energy of their voice is. So sometimes there were characters like that where it was very intentional to craft it. And then other times there are other characters where you're just like, oh, this person, this is how they speak. This is the terms of endearment that they use. This is, are they, dropping G's? Are they speaking in this way? Sometimes there are characters that just kind of, their voice comes to you in that way of, this is the sort of texture and the character of how they speak. Are they really sarcastic? Are they, whatever, all of that sometimes comes to you in that way. So it's a kind of a mixture of it, I think. But I think for that book, it's a book that has a lot of characters, really. So it was important for me to make sure that all those characters sounded distinct from one another, even if you were not directly in their consciousness, just to get that vibe from them and everybody having their own kind of flair.
Thank you. Ayelet, there's another question here about asking, do you have an Etsy for those effing Trump embroidery samplers? Anywhere?
No, I don't, because they were, that's how I taught myself how to do embroidery. They're very, very bad. But that's like the ultimate. You too can embroider "fuck Trump" on a piece of fabric. It's very easy, and then you learn. It's how you learn all sorts of different stitches.
Here's a question for both of you. So both of you have tackled important societal issues in your work: motherhood, mental health, race identity. How do you decide how much to use writing as a forum to push dialogue on such critical issues versus using writing as an escape or for fun or for yourself?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I think, I end up writing about stuff that matters because I care about stuff that matters. But I think it's pretty dangerous to be over, like, you're just going to end up in a place of sort of didactic. I worry that I'm going to end up in a place that'll be too didactic and won't be interesting for me. What matters is the characters and the story. So the larger political issue has to be organic to that. It has to actually make some kind of sense. And I think you do it best when you're not doing it on purpose. And then I have these other areas where I actually have an overt political agenda, and that I do work that has political meaning, like editing an anthology that Brit wrote the beautiful essay for. And that was a celebration of the centennial of the ACLU. Or I also edited an anthology called A Kingdom of Olives and Ash, which was about the occupation of Palestine. So that's where I do my sort of more overt political agenda. But I think like if you're interested in the world around you, you inevitably write about the world around you. And I don't know that I've ever really been interested in the kind of incredibly interior novel that is just about one person and one person's relationship to herself, as opposed to a person's relationship to the world and the people that she knows and loves and sees and experiences. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I have always been interested in the novel as like a stories that are about communities, and to me those are the types of novels I like to read and I like to write, which allows you to dovetail into those sort of larger questions. And I think about often is I heard Tiari Jones say this once, but the idea of writing about people and their problems versus problems and their people. And that's something I think that I always try to kind of keep in mind is like, yeah, you're starting with character. You're starting with being specific of who those characters are. And then from there, maybe you're talking about these larger political or larger social conversations, but it's grounded in the character. It starts from that, not from starting with, I want to write about X issue and then trying to find a character to assign that to. I think those are the books that feel really didactic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%.
So as you know, we're A26LA writing organization. We have our sort of chapter in it. A26 National is sort of the overseeing chapter of the organization, and they just put out a report which showed that reading is being emphasized more in schools than writing is. This comes from Susan, by the way. And as an organization that's dedicated to helping students with their writing skills, do you have ideas about what else we can do beyond helping kids with their writing skills to help kids, families, and schools increase a focus on writing? So many people just say,
I don't want that. I don't want that at all. No, the worst thing in the world is all these people who want to be writers who don't read. The way that you care about writing is by reading. You want children to read. Children who love reading will want to create their own writing. They'll start to do that. Like focusing on writing, as if you're going to put those two in opposition to each other, make someone who loves the written word and who loves experiences and who loves reading it, and that person, then you can work on the skills of writing later, sort of the overt skills if they're writing, say, essays. But children who love to read will naturally want to create their own poetry, fiction. I think setting those up as if I had to choose between the two, I would take away their pencils and just give them all the books in the world. You have all this famous thing that the worst writers often will say, which is, I don't like to read when I'm writing my novels because I don't want someone else's voice to influence mine. Yeah, that would really suck if, say, Jane Austen or James Baldwin influenced your voice. That would be terrible. You wouldn't want to get a little influence from those people because, I remember I was on a panel with a woman who wrote like the worst kind of shitty commercial, like exploitation shopping, literally shopping novels. And she said that. And I was like, yeah, that would suck for you if you got a little like Jane Austen, Brit Bennett in your work. Wouldn't that be terrible? It's just like nuts. It's madness. I believe the only reason I write is because I love to read. I would so much prefer my children were readers than, writers who didn't read. That would be terrible. Sorry,
Yeah.
Strong feeling about that. Alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. And I think also, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't work with young students. When I was teaching the college level. But the thing I guess I would be curious of for younger students is, I think it's true of college students too, but just like people like I imagine that young students generally are writing a ton, just like in their day-to-day lives, like maybe they're not sitting down to write short stories or something, but I think people are communicating, maybe they're writing fan fiction, maybe they're, blogging or whatever, maybe they're on, I don't know how many kids are on Twitter, but whatever social media. Yeah, I don't think many, but somebody said Twitter is where old people go to talk about things that nobody else cares about, which I was like, yes, drag us. So I don't know, the forms, but there may be some other forms like that are really vibrant to them that are not like writing a research paper or something. So I think it also is interesting to think about what those other forms are where younger people are enjoying writing on their own, whether it's, something, it may not be in a classroom, it may just be a space. There's so many writers I know who started writing fan fiction and became novelists, and that was their form of writing Harry Potter fan fiction. And now, that's how you began sort of developing those skills to write, which doesn't happen in a classroom. It happens in this whole other online space. So I think there could be some way to think about what those other spaces are that already exist, where young people are drawn towards creating, that can be places where they also continue to develop those skills.
I mean, I have 4 kids, and my youngest son had a very peripatetic high school experience. He went to a very good middle school where they did teach sort of basic essay skills. But of the 4, he's definitely the best writer, and he writes, he really likes to write sort of research papers. And the reason that he writes them well is because of the 4 of them, he's the one who reads the most nonfiction and like political analysis and hardcore journalism. And so he's trying to write the things he likes to read, which I think is really what's the most important lesson. Like, my daughter loves to write poetry, but she loves to write poetry because she loves to read poetry. And whenever I'm finding that I'll be working on a piece and I hate it, or a novel that just isn't working, and my husband, who's the fount of all wisdom, will say to me, would you want to read that book? And I'll be like, well, no. And then I know that I'm not writing the right thing, because if you're not creating the thing that you want to consume, then inevitably you're not going to make it, you're not going to give it the magic that you would need it to have.
Right.
Well said. A lot of agreement on the chat. Here's one last question. Where time is up here. So someone would like to know any recommendations, any reading recommendations, watching, listening recommendations. Brit, I'm kind of excited to hear a little bit more about your music stuff, if there's any recommendations around that. But yeah, throwing it out there as a final question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess recommendations, this is obnoxious because this book isn't out yet, but I got an early copy of the new Colson Whitehead book, Harlem Shuffle, which is so much fun. Like, it's a book that's about a heist and in Harlem in like the 1960s. And it just feels like a nice, I mean, I have not finished with it yet, so maybe it's going to end in really intense tragedy, but it feels like emotionally like a nice kind of break from his past 2 books, which were both really, I loved both of those books, but they were so emotionally intense. And so it's been nice to read this book about these like hustlers in Harlem all trying to like steal jewelry from this hotel. So I've enjoyed that book. I'm enjoying that book right now. And I just read the final revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton, which is a really fun debut. It's a fictional oral history of a rock and roll duo from the 60s. So that book has been really fun. And other listening, I've been doing my podcast walk. So I'm really into You're Wrong About, which is like a podcast that sort of debunks our misinterpretations of events from the past. I've been really into that one. And Switched on Pop, which is a fun podcast that analyzes pop music. They have a musicologist and a songwriter who work together to tell you how songs are put together. And as a person who does not have any musical ability, but just enjoys music, it's really fun to understand like, oh, this is why that is good. When you just thought as a person listening to it, you liked it. So it's nice to have that language for understanding how music and how songs actually work.
I am reading a newish biography of Joan Didion. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of nonfiction, just for whatever reason. I don't read it that much. But I am really, really loving this particular biography. It's called The Last Love Song, and it's written by Tracy Doherty. And it's interesting right now. We've discovered that the guy who wrote the Philip Roth biography, which already seemed like a terrible book, is himself a rapist. Yay, nice. And I would say, like, if you want to actually read a really good literary biography that actually delves into the work itself and is incredibly beautifully written and interesting, try this one. Try this Joan Didion biography. So I'm really loving that. It's really beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for your time, for being here, for your support of 826 LA. Really appreciate it. I know that our
Well,
friends.
thank you guys for what you do. 826 is a miraculous organization, and we're so grateful to all of you for, giving it your all the time.
Thank you for your amazing support. You've been a part of this for such a long time. I know you were one of the earliest supporters, so thank you. Yeah, and Brit, thank you so much for your time as well here today. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, all of you, for joining, and thank you, Brit, and thank you, Ayelet. And oh, sorry, did we lose Ayelet? Quickly. And thank you for such great recommendations. Second and third, their words on 826 LA. They really are a fantastic organization, which is why we have partnered on many occasions and hope to partner many more times in the future. So do consider donating. This conversation will be uploaded to YouTube and available indefinitely. And we'll also release a podcast within the next 48 hours. So do watch it again. Maybe if you missed some of the recommendations, or share with any friends that you think might enjoy watching it too. Well, thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.